The key turned in the lock of our downtown Austin loft, and I pushed open the door expecting the familiar silence of our empty apartment. Tyler wasn't supposed to be home for another 3 hours, and I had planned to surprise him with his favorite, takeout from that Vietnamese place on South Lamar after my business trip to Dallas got cut short. Instead, what greeted me was the sound of muffled laughter drifting from our bedroom, followed by a voice I recognized all too well saying something that made my blood freeze in my veins. "Tyler, we can't keep doing this. Emma will be back tomorrow, and the wedding is only 6 weeks away." The voice belonged to Jessica Parker, my maid of honor, my former college roommate, and supposedly one of my closest friends. The response that came next, in my fiancé's familiar baritone, shattered everything I thought I knew about the man I was planning to marry. "Jess, you worry too much. Emma's so caught up in wedding planning, she barely notices anything anymore. Besides, after we're married, things will be different. This is just us getting it out of our systems." I stood frozen in our entryway, my overnight bag still clutched in my hand, as the full weight of their betrayal crashed over me. This wasn't some spontaneous moment of weakness. This was an ongoing affair, calculated and deliberate, happening right under my nose while I was busy planning what I thought would be the happiest day of my life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Emma Rodriguez, and 6 weeks ago, I thought I had it all figured out. At 28, I was the youngest marketing manager at Austin's fastest-growing tech startup, living in a beautiful downtown loft with the man I'd been dating for 3 years, planning our October wedding at Riverside Gardens, one of the most sought-after venues in the city. My life looked perfect from the outside, and honestly, I thought it was pretty perfect from the inside, too. I'd met Tyler Mitchell during my second year at the startup, when his pharmaceutical company partnered with us for a joint marketing campaign. He was handsome in that clean-cut, all-American way that had always appealed to me, with sandy brown hair, green eyes, and the kind of confident smile that could charm anyone. He drove a BMW, wore tailored shirts, and had the kind of easy social grace that came from growing up in Westlake with parents who belonged to the country club and summered in Colorado. Tyler was different from the guys I'd dated before, where my previous relationships had been with fellow creatives or tech guys who lived in jeans and vintage t-shirts. Tyler brought a level of sophistication and stability that my traditional Hispanic family immediately loved. My mother, Maria, who worked double shifts as a nurse at St. David's Medical Center, practically glowed when Tyler would bring her flowers and ask about her patients. My father, Carlos, who'd built his small construction business from nothing, respected Tyler's ambition and business acumen. When Tyler proposed last Christmas, right there in my parents' living room in front of our entire extended family, it felt like a fairy tale. He'd coordinated with my mother to make sure all my aunts, uncles, and cousins were there, and he'd even learned a few phrases in Spanish to ask my father for permission properly. The ring was everything I'd ever dreamed of, a classic solitaire. That caught the light beautifully, and when I said yes, the entire room erupted in celebration. Planning our wedding had consumed most of my free time for the past 8 months. We'd booked Riverside Gardens after touring a dozen venues, chosen a menu that would satisfy both our families' tastes, and I'd spent countless hours with my best friend Mia Chen, who worked as a wedding planner, perfecting every detail. Mia had been incredulous at our budget, telling me that Tyler's family was clearly sparing no expense, and she was right. The Mitchells had insisted on paying for the majority of the wedding, brushing off my parents' modest attempts to contribute, with gracious but firm refusal. Jessica had been the obvious choice for maid of honor. We'd been roommates our junior year at UT, bonding over late-night study sessions and shared dreams of making it in Austin's competitive creative scene. After graduation, she'd moved to Denver to try freelance graphic design. But when she called 6 months ago saying she was moving back to Austin and needed a place to crash while she found her footing, Tyler and I had immediately offered our guest room. She'd been staying with us on and off for weeks, supposedly apartment hunting but seeming in no hurry to move out. I should have seen the signs. Jessica's sudden interest in Tyler's work stories when she'd never cared about business before. The way she would linger in our kitchen in the mornings, making coffee in the silk pajama set she'd bought specifically for staying at our place. How she always seemed to know Tyler's schedule better than I did, asking casual questions about his meetings and travel plans. The way Tyler had started working late more often, coming home smelling like the expensive perfume Jessica wore. But I'd been so focused on wedding preparations, so caught up in the excitement of finally having my life fall into place, that I'd dismissed every red flag as my imagination. When my sister Rachel, who taught third grade and had always been the more intuitive of the Rodriguez siblings, mentioned that something seemed off about how Jessica looked at Tyler, I'd laughed it off. When my work colleague Amanda Foster, who handled HR at our startup and had a sixth sense about people's motivations, suggested that maybe it was time for Jessica to find her own place, I'd defended my friend and accused Amanda of being overly suspicious. The irony was that I prided myself on being observant. In my marketing role, I was constantly analyzing consumer behavior, reading between the lines of focus group feedback, and identifying patterns that others missed. I could spot a dishonest client or a problematic campaign strategy from a mile away. But when it came to the two people I trusted most in the world, I'd been completely blind. Standing in my own entryway, listening to my fiancé and my maid of honor discuss their ongoing affair as if it were a minor inconvenience to be managed around my wedding schedule, I felt something shift inside me. The initial shock and heartbreak were still there, threatening to overwhelm me. But underneath those emotions, something else was building. A cold, calculating anger that demanded action rather than collapse. I could have stormed into the bedroom, confronted them both, and demanded explanations and apologies. I could have thrown Jessica's belongings out onto the street and screamed at Tyler until the neighbors called security. I could have called off the wedding immediately, spent the evening crying to my family, and let everyone know exactly why my perfect relationship had imploded 6 weeks before the ceremony. Instead, I did something that surprised even me. I quietly set down my overnight bag, pulled out my phone, and started recording. Not for revenge, not for public humiliation, but for evidence. Because as I stood there listening to Tyler explain to Jessica how he planned to manage both relationships after our marriage, I realized that this betrayal went deeper than a simple affair. This was fraud, emotional manipulation, and a level of disrespect that deserved consequences far beyond a simple breakup. They were discussing how to handle the wedding night, how Tyler would need to be more careful about his phone after we were married, and how Jessica might be able to get a job with one of Tyler's pharmaceutical contacts so they could continue seeing each other professionally. They had planned this out, mapped out a future where I would be Tyler's unsuspecting wife while Jessica remained his mistress, and they were discussing it with the casual tone of people planning a vacation. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, during which I learned that this had been going on for at least 2 months, that they'd been intimate in our bed multiple times while I was at work, and that Jessica had been feeding Tyler information about my insecurities and concerns that I'd shared with her in confidence. She'd told him about my worries that his family didn't think I was sophisticated enough, about my anxiety that our different backgrounds might cause problems, about my fears that I wasn't pretty enough or successful enough to keep a man like him interested. Tyler had laughed at those revelations, telling Jessica that my insecurities made me easier to manage, that he could keep me grateful and compliant by occasionally reassuring me about my fears. He'd said that marrying me was a smart move because I was stable, family-oriented, and would make a good mother, while Jessica was more exciting but too unreliable for marriage. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He was literally discussing us like we were different products, serving different functions in his life. When I finally heard them preparing to leave the bedroom, I quickly moved to our kitchen, opened a bottle of wine, and arranged myself at our breakfast bar with my laptop open as if I'd been working. By the time they emerged, I looked like I'd been home for hours, completely absorbed in responding to emails. "Emma!" Jessica exclaimed, her face flushing as she saw me. "I thought you weren't coming back until tomorrow." "Meeting's wrapped. Up early," I replied calmly, not looking up from my screen. "Hope you two haven't been too bored without me." Tyler crossed the room and kissed my cheek, the same casual gesture he'd performed thousands of times before. But now it felt like a snake's caress. We were just hanging out, watching Netflix. Jess was telling me about this new client she's hoping to land. The ease with which he lied was breathtaking. There was no nervousness, no guilt in his expression, just the same charming confidence that had attracted me to him in the first place. Jessica nodded enthusiastically, launching into an elaborate story about a fictional graphic design project that she delivered with impressive detail for something she'd just invented. I made appropriate responses, asked follow-up questions, and played the role of the trusting fiancé while mentally cataloging every lie, every manipulation, every moment of casual betrayal. When Jessica finally said she was going to head out to meet another friend for dinner, I hugged her goodbye just as I always did, even told her I'd missed her while I was away. After she left, Tyler and I settled into our normal evening routine. He asked about my business trip, shared stories about his own work week, and discussed our upcoming wedding timeline with the same enthusiasm he'd always shown. We ordered takeout, watched a movie, and went to bed together, where Tyler made love to me with what seemed like genuine passion and tenderness. Lying next to him afterward, listening to his breathing slow into sleep, I stared at the ceiling and felt the full weight of my situation settle over me. In 6 weeks, I was supposed to marry this man in front of 150 guests, in a ceremony that would cost close to $60,000, most of it paid for by his family. I was supposed to pledge my life to someone who had been systematically betraying me with my best friend, who had been discussing my insecurities like ammunition to be used against me, who had already planned out how to continue cheating on me after our marriage. The obvious response would be to confront him, to demand the truth, to call off the wedding and walk away. But as I lay there in the darkness, I found myself thinking about something my older brother David had told me years ago when I was dealing with a difficult situation at work. David was an attorney, methodical and strategic in his thinking, and he'd said that the most important thing in any conflict was to understand your leverage before you made your move. What leverage did I have? Tyler and his family had paid for most of the wedding, which meant they had the most to lose financially if it was canceled. Tyler's reputation in Austin's pharmaceutical sales community would be severely damaged if word got out about his affair, especially with someone who was supposed to be my best friend. Jessica's freelance career depended on referrals and word of mouth, which would dry up quickly if her behavior became public knowledge. More importantly, I had evidence. I had recordings of their conversations, access to Tyler's phone and email, while he slept, and 6 weeks to gather more information before I had to make any public moves. I had a support network that Tyler didn't know about, professional contacts who could help me, and the advantage of them not knowing that I knew. Tyler had made a critical error in thinking I was too trusting, too naive, too focused on wedding, planning to notice what was happening right under my nose. He'd underestimated me completely, assuming that my love for him made me weak rather than strong. Jessica had made the same mistake, believing that our friendship meant I would never suspect her of such a betrayal. They were both about to learn that Emma Rodriguez was far more strategic than they'd given her credit for, and that betraying someone's trust came with consequences they hadn't anticipated. The wedding they thought I was too distracted to pay attention to was about to become the perfect venue for a very different kind of ceremony than they were expecting. As Tyler's breathing deepened into genuine sleep beside me, I began planning my response. Not a reaction born of hurt and anger, though those emotions were certainly present. but a calculated strategy designed to ensure that the people who had betrayed me would face appropriate consequences for their actions. They had chosen to play games with my life, my future, and my heart. Now they would discover that I was far better at games than either of them had realized. The next morning dawned clear and beautiful, typical October weather in Austin that promised a perfect day. Tyler woke up in a great mood, humming in the shower and making jokes over coffee. He kissed me goodbye with apparent affection and told me he loved me, just as he had every morning for the past 3 years. Jessica texted me around 10, asking if I wanted to grab lunch and finalize some last-minute wedding details. I responded to both of them with the same warmth and enthusiasm I'd always shown, playing my role perfectly while inside. My mind was working furiously. I had 6 weeks to plan the most important campaign of my life, and unlike the marketing strategies I developed at work, this one was personal. The stakes weren't market share or brand recognition. The stakes were justice, integrity, and ensuring that 2 people who had chosen to deceive and manipulate me would face consequences proportional to their betrayal. Tyler and Jessica thought they were managing me, keeping me distracted and compliant while they pursued their own agenda. They had no idea that I was about to turn their own tactics against them, using their assumptions about my naivety as the foundation for a strategy that would give me exactly the leverage I needed. The wedding they were so casually discussing, as a minor obstacle to their affair, was about to become the centerpiece of my response to their betrayal. They wanted to play games with my life. Fine. But they were about to discover that I was playing an entirely different game than they thought, with rules they didn't understand, and stakes they hadn't considered. The next 6 weeks were going to be very interesting indeed. The next 3 days passed in a surreal haze of normalcy, punctuated by moments of crystal-clear revelation. I went through the motions of my regular routine while secretly documenting every lie, every manipulation, every moment of casual betrayal that I'd previously dismissed or rationalized away. What I discovered was that Tyler and Jessica's affair wasn't just a recent development. It was the culmination of a pattern of behavior that had been escalating for months, hidden in plain sight while I focused on wedding planning and career advancement. Tyler had always been charming, but now I recognized the calculated nature of that charm. The way he would compliment my appearance right before mentioning something he wanted me to change. How he would praise my intelligence while simultaneously explaining things to me that I already understood better than he did. The subtle ways he undermined my confidence while positioning himself as my savior and supporter. I'd thought these behaviors were quirks of his personality, maybe even endearing signs of how much he cared about my improvement and success. Jessica's manipulation had been even more insidious because it was wrapped in the language of friendship and support. She'd been my confidant, the person I turned to when Tyler's behavior confused or hurt me, and she'd used that position to gather information that she then shared with him. When I'd worried that Tyler seemed distant or distracted, Jessica had reassured me that all couples went through rough patches, especially during stressful wedding planning. When I'd noticed that Tyler was working late more often, Jessica had suggested that ambitious men sometimes needed space to focus on their careers, and that being understanding about his schedule would strengthen our relationship. She'd been playing both sides, feeding my insecurities to Tyler while positioning herself as my supportive friend, all while carrying on an affair with my fiancé in my own home. The level of calculation and cruelty involved was breathtaking, once I allowed myself to see it clearly. The revelation came in pieces, each new understanding building on the last until the full scope of their deception became undeniable. Tyler's sudden interest in yoga classes that he'd previously mocked coincided with Jessica's enrollment in the same studio. His newfound appreciation for craft cocktails aligned perfectly with Jessica's knowledge of Austin's best speakeasy bars. The expensive wine that had started appearing in his office refrigerator matched the bottles Jessica had been posting on her Instagram stories. They'd been hiding in plain sight, creating a shared life right alongside the one Tyler was building with me, and they'd done it so skillfully that I'd actually facilitated many of their opportunities to be together. I'd encouraged Tyler to include Jessica in our social plans because I wanted my friend to feel welcome in Austin. I'd suggested that Jessica accompany Tyler to professional events when I was busy with work, thinking it would help her network and build her freelance business. I'd even asked Tyler to help Jessica with her apartment search, grateful that my fiancé was being so supportive of someone important to me. Every act of generosity, every moment of trust, every gesture of inclusion had been turned into an opportunity for them to deepen their betrayal. They'd used my love for both of them as cover for their affair, counting on my devotion to blind me to what was happening right in front of me. By Thursday afternoon, I knew I needed to talk to someone before the weight of what I'd discovered drove me to make an impulsive decision I might regret. But choosing the right confidant required careful consideration. This wasn't just about emotional support, though I desperately needed that. This was about building a strategic response to a situation that would require careful planning and flawless execution. I decided to start with my sister Rachel, partly because I trusted her judgment implicitly, but mostly because her teaching experience had given her an unusual ability to see through manipulation and deception. Elementary school children were surprisingly sophisticated liars, and Rachel had developed an almost supernatural ability to detect when someone was trying to deceive her. I called her during her lunch break, asking if she could meet me for coffee after school. Rachel immediately picked up on the tension in my voice, but she didn't push for details over the phone. She simply said she'd be at Cafe Luna by 4:30 and that she'd bring tissues just in case. Rachel arrived at the coffee shop looking concerned but composed, her dark hair pulled back in the practical ponytail she wore for teaching, her expression already shifting into the focused attention mode that made her so effective with both children and adults who needed her help. She took one look at my face and ordered us both large lattes before steering me to a corner table where we could talk privately. "What happened?" she asked without preamble, her voice gentle but direct. I told her everything. The overheard conversation, the recordings I'd made, the pattern of manipulation I'd started recognizing, the evidence I'd been gathering over the past few days. Rachel listened without interrupting, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly just absorbing the full scope of Tyler and Jessica's betrayal. When I finished, Rachel sat quietly for a long moment, processing what I'd shared. Finally, she spoke, her voice carefully controlled, but with an undercurrent of fury that surprised me with its intensity. "Emma, this isn't just cheating. This is psychological manipulation on a level that's genuinely disturbing. The way they've been coordinating to undermine your confidence while positioning themselves as your support system is textbook emotional abuse." Hearing my sister use those words, spoken with the authority of someone who'd been trained to recognize signs of manipulation and abuse, made something click into place. I'd been thinking of this as infidelity, as a betrayal of trust that was painful but ultimately survivable. Rachel was helping me understand that what Tyler and Jessica had done went far beyond a simple affair. "What are you going to do?" Rachel asked, leaning forward across the small table. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "The obvious answer is to confront them and call off the wedding. But something about that feels wrong. Like I'd be playing right into their expectations of how I'd react." Rachel nodded thoughtfully. "You're right to be cautious about your response. People who manipulate others at this level usually have contingency plans for different reactions. They've probably already discussed how they'd handle it if you found out." The thought sent a chill through me. Of course they'd planned for the possibility of discovery. Tyler was too strategic in his business dealings to leave something this important to chance, and Jessica was too calculating in her manipulations to not have considered various scenarios. "I need to be smarter than they think I am," I said, the words feeling right as I spoke them. "They're counting on me being emotional and reactive. Maybe that's not the person I need to be right now." Rachel smiled for the first time since I'd started talking, pride evident in her expression. Now you're thinking like the Emma I know, the one who built her marketing career by outthinking competitors who underestimated her. We spent another hour discussing possibilities and implications. Rachel helped me think through the legal aspects, the financial considerations, and the social consequences of different approaches. She also offered practical support, suggesting that I stay with her and her husband Mark for a few days if I needed space to think, and promising to help with whatever plan I ultimately decided to pursue. As we prepared to leave, Rachel asked one more question that proved to be crucial in shaping my strategy. Emma, what would success look like to you? Not just ending the engagement, but actually resolving this in a way that feels proportional to what they've done? I thought about it for a moment before answering. I want them to face real consequences. Not just losing me, but losing the respect of the people who know them. I want their behavior to be exposed in a way that makes it impossible for them to just move on and do this to someone else, and I want to come out of this stronger, not destroyed. Rachel nodded approvingly. Then you need a plan that accomplishes all of those things without making you look vindictive or unstable. That's going to require some serious strategic thinking. That evening, I called my best friend Mia Chen, ostensibly to discuss final wedding preparations, but actually to begin the delicate process of bringing her into my confidence. Mia had been in the wedding planning business long enough to have seen every kind of drama and crisis, and her insights into human behavior were as sharp as her organizational skills. Mia, can you come over this weekend? I want to go through some of the vendor contracts and make sure we haven't missed anything important. Mia agreed immediately, though I could hear curiosity in her voice. We'd already reviewed the contracts multiple times, and she knew I wasn't typically the type to second-guess decisions we'd already finalized. Saturday morning, Mia arrived at my apartment with her planning binder and her usual enthusiasm for wedding logistics. Tyler had gone to play golf with some colleagues, and Jessica was supposedly apartment hunting, which gave us privacy to talk openly. I made coffee and settled us at my dining room table, surrounded by the wedding planning materials that had consumed so much of my attention over the past months. Looking at the carefully organized folders and color-coded timelines, I felt a wave of sadness for the innocent version of myself who had put so much joy and hope into planning this celebration. Mia, before we dive into the contracts, I need to tell you something, and I need to know that what I'm about to share stays between us until I decide how to handle it. Mia's expression immediately shifted to concern. She'd known me since high school. Through my awkward teenage years, my college experiments with identity and independence, and my gradual development into a confident professional woman, she could read my moods better than almost anyone. Of course, Emma. What's going on? I told her about discovering the affair, about the evidence I'd gathered, about the manipulation and planning that Tyler and Jessica had been doing behind my back. Mia listened with growing horror and anger, occasionally muttering Spanish curse words that she'd learned from my grandmother and reserved for only the most egregious situations. When I finished, Mia was quiet for a long time, staring at the wedding planning materials spread across my table with an expression of disgust. "Those absolute bastards," she finally said, her voice shaking with fury. "Emma, in 15 years of wedding planning, I've seen cheating, I've seen family drama, I've seen financial disasters and vendor catastrophes. But this level of calculated manipulation, using your wedding planning as cover for an affair, this is something else entirely." Mia's professional perspective added another layer to my understanding of Tyler and Jessica's betrayal. They hadn't just violated my personal trust, they'd corrupted one of the most significant celebrations of my life, turning something that should have been pure joy into a backdrop for their deception. "What do you want to do?" Mia asked, echoing Rachel's question from the day before. "I want them to face consequences that match what they've done," I replied. "But I also want to make sure I'm protected, legally and financially. And I don't want to destroy myself in the process of making sure they face justice." Mia nodded slowly, her wedding planner mind already working through the implications and possibilities. Emma, the financial aspect of this is significant. Tyler's family has paid for most of the wedding, which means they have the most to lose if it's canceled. The vendor contracts have cancellation clauses, but the timing matters. Some of the payments are non-refundable at this point, and others become non-refundable as we get closer to the date. She pulled out her planning binder and started flipping through pages of contracts and timelines. If you called off the wedding today, Tyler's family would lose about 30% of what they've paid. If you wait another 2 weeks, they'd lose closer to 60%. If you wait until the week of the wedding, it's almost a total loss. The information was fascinating from a strategic standpoint. Tyler and his family's financial investment in the wedding created leverage that I could use to ensure appropriate consequences for his behavior. "What about the vendors?" I asked. "How would cancellation affect them?" Mia considered the question carefully. "Most of our vendors are people I've worked with for years. They're good people running legitimate businesses, and they've blocked out time and resources for your wedding. Canceling would hurt them financially, especially on short notice." That consideration was important to me. I didn't want innocent people to suffer because of Tyler and Jessica's choices. Whatever strategy I developed needed to protect the vendors who had done nothing wrong. "There might be another way to handle this," Mia said thoughtfully. "What if we don't cancel the wedding? What if we modify it?" The suggestion was intriguing but confusing. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if the wedding still happens but not the way Tyler and Jessica are expecting? You have 6 weeks to plan something entirely different, something that serves your purposes instead of theirs." The idea was audacious and appealing. Instead of canceling the wedding and letting Tyler and Jessica off the hook financially, while disappointing all the vendors and guests, I could use the event itself as the venue for revealing their betrayal and ensuring they faced appropriate consequences. "Mia, that's brilliant, but also terrifying. How would something like that even work?" Mia grinned, the expression transforming her face into something slightly predatory. "Emma, I've been planning events for 15 years. I know how to coordinate vendors, manage timelines, and control narratives. If you want to turn your wedding into something Tyler and Jessica aren't expecting, I can make that happen." We spent the rest of the morning brainstorming possibilities and implications. Mia's expertise in event planning, combined with her intimate knowledge of the vendors and venue, gave her insights into opportunities I never would have considered on my own. By the time Tyler returned from golf, Mia and I had the foundation of a plan that was both audacious and carefully crafted. We'd identified the key people who would need to be brought into our confidence, the timeline for implementing changes without alerting Tyler and Jessica, and the backup plans we'd need in case they discovered what we were doing. Tyler greeted Mia warmly when he came home, thanking her for all her hard work on our wedding and joking about how lucky he was to have such organized women in his life. Watching him perform charm and gratitude while knowing what I now knew about his character was surreal and infuriating. Mia handled the interaction perfectly, maintaining her professional demeanor while internally cataloging every detail that might be useful later. When she left that afternoon, she hugged me goodbye and whispered, "This is going to be the most memorable wedding I've ever planned." Sunday evening, I called my brother David and asked if he could meet me for dinner. During the week, David was 3 years older than me, a successful attorney who specialized in contract law and business disputes. More importantly, he was someone whose judgment I trusted completely and whose professional expertise would be crucial for what I was contemplating. David suggested we meet at Suerte, a restaurant in East Austin that was trendy enough to provide good cover for a private conversation, but not so loud that we couldn't talk seriously. He arrived straight from his office, still wearing the tailored suit that was his professional uniform, but his expression was casual and relaxed until he saw my face. "Emma, what's wrong? You look like you haven't slept in days." David had always been protective of his younger sisters. and his attorney instincts made him particularly good at reading when someone was in trouble. I'd called this meeting because I needed his legal expertise, but I realized I also needed his brotherly support. I told him everything, just as I had with Rachel and Mia, but I focused particularly on the legal and financial implications of what Tyler and Jessica had done. David listened with the same focused attention he brought to complex legal cases, occasionally asking questions to clarify details or timelines. When I finished, David was quiet for several minutes, his expression shifting between the fury of a protective brother and the analytical focus of an experienced attorney. Emma, what Tyler has done could potentially be considered fraud, depending on how Texas law interprets emotional and financial manipulation in the context of engagement and marriage planning. Jessica's involvement makes it conspiracy, but proving that in court would be difficult and expensive, and the emotional cost to you would be enormous. David's legal perspective added another dimension to my understanding of the situation. Tyler and Jessica's behavior wasn't just morally reprehensible, it potentially crossed legal boundaries as well. "What would you recommend?" I asked. David considered the question carefully before answering. "Legally, you'd be within your rights to pursue civil action for the emotional distress and financial damages they've caused. But practically, I think you'd be better served by a strategy that exposes their behavior and ensures consequences without getting bogged down in lengthy court proceedings." He paused, studying my face intently. "Emma, what are you really asking? Me? Because I get the sense that you're not just looking for legal advice about ending this engagement." I took a deep breath before answering. "David, I want them to face consequences that match what they've done. And I want to make sure I'm protected legally while that happens. Mia and I have been discussing some unconventional approaches, and I need to know what my legal exposure would be." David's eyebrows rose slightly, but his expression remained professional. "What kind of unconventional approaches?" I outlined the basic framework that Mia and I had developed, focusing on the legal implications and potential risks. David listened without judgment, occasionally asking clarifying questions or pointing out considerations I hadn't thought of. "Emma, what you're describing is legally permissible, but it's also high risk. If you execute it perfectly, you'll achieve everything you want. If you make mistakes or if Tyler and Jessica figure out what you're doing before you're ready, it could backfire spectacularly." David's assessment was sobering but not discouraging. High-risk strategies were sometimes necessary when dealing with people who had already demonstrated their willingness to manipulate and deceive. "Would you be willing to help me?" I asked. Not as my attorney necessarily, but as my brother who happens to have relevant expertise. David smiled, the expression combining affection with professional respect. "Emma, anyone who would manipulate my little sister the way Tyler has manipulated you deserves whatever consequences you can legally arrange. Yes, I'll help you. And yes, I'll do it as your brother first and your legal counsel second." By the end of our dinner, David had agreed to research the specific legal protections I'd need and to review any contracts or agreements that would be part of my strategy. He also offered to coordinate with his colleague, Michael Torres, who specialized in family law and had experience with situations involving fraud and manipulation in romantic relationships. "One more thing, Emma," David said as we prepared to leave the restaurant. "Whatever you decide to do, you need to be prepared for the possibility that Tyler and Jessica will try to turn this around on you. People who manipulate others at this level are often very good at playing the victim when they get caught." David's warning was important. Tyler and Jessica had already demonstrated their skill at manipulation and deception. If they discovered my strategy before I was ready to implement it, they would undoubtedly try to paint me as the unreasonable one, the vindictive ex-fiancé who couldn't handle being rejected. That possibility made it even more important to execute my plan flawlessly, with careful documentation and the support of people who could testify to my reasonableness and their manipulation. The next few weeks would require the kind of strategic thinking and flawless execution that I'd never attempted before. But I was beginning to believe I was capable of more than Tyler and Jessica had given me credit for. The following day, I called Amanda Foster, my colleague from the startup who handled HR and had always demonstrated exceptional insight into people's motivations and character. Amanda had mentioned several times that something seemed off about Jessica, and her professional experience dealing with workplace manipulation and conflicts made her perspective valuable. "Amanda, would you be free for lunch this week? I'd like to get your take on something, and I need someone with your expertise in reading people and situations." Amanda agreed immediately, suggesting we meet at a small restaurant near our office where we could talk privately. She arrived looking professional and composed, but I could see curiosity and concern in her expression. I told Amanda about discovering the affair, about the manipulation I'd uncovered, and about the strategic response I was considering. Amanda listened with the same focused attention she brought to complex HR situations, occasionally asking questions to clarify motivations or timelines. "Emma, this is textbook workplace manipulation applied to a personal relationship," Amanda said when I finished. "The way Tyler has been undermining your confidence while positioning himself as your support system is exactly what we see from managers who abuse their power. Jessica's role as double agent, gathering information from you to use against you, is equally manipulative." Amanda's professional perspective on manipulation and power dynamics added another layer to my understanding of what Tyler and Jessica had done. They'd essentially created a hostile environment in my own relationship, using techniques that would be grounds for termination in any decent workplace. "What do you think about my strategy for responding?" I asked. Amanda considered the question carefully. "It's risky, but it's also proportional to what they've done. More importantly, it puts you in control of the narrative instead of letting them dictate how this plays out." She paused, studying my face intently. "Emma, are you sure you're ready for this? What you're contemplating will require you to maintain perfect composure under enormous pressure while coordinating a complex plan involving multiple people. It's going to be emotionally and mentally exhausting." Amanda's question forced me to confront the reality of what I was considering. The strategy I was developing would require me to continue living with Tyler, continue interacting with Jessica, continue planning our wedding, all while secretly orchestrating their exposure and ensuring they faced appropriate consequences. The level of self-control and strategic thinking required was daunting. "I think I have to try," I replied. "The alternative is letting them get away with this and potentially doing it to someone else in the future." Amanda nodded approvingly. "Then you'll need support, professional support from people who understand manipulation and strategic response. I'd like to help if you'll let me." Amanda's offer was both generous and strategically valuable. Her expertise in managing complex interpersonal situations and her understanding of documentation and evidence would be crucial for implementing my plan successfully. By the end of our lunch, Amanda had agreed to help coordinate the communication and documentation aspects of my strategy, ensuring that every interaction with Tyler and Jessica was properly recorded and that all evidence was preserved in ways that would be legally admissible if necessary. The team I was assembling represented different types of expertise and support that would be crucial for executing my plan successfully. Rachel provided emotional support and insight into manipulation tactics. Mia brought event planning expertise and vendor relationships. David offered legal protection and strategic analysis. Amanda contributed professional knowledge of documentation and evidence management. Together, we represented a formidable alliance of people who cared about my welfare and possessed the skills necessary to help me respond to Tyler and Jessica's betrayal in a way that was both strategic and proportional. Over the next several weeks, each of them would play crucial roles in ensuring that Tyler and Jessica faced consequences appropriate to their actions while protecting me from legal and emotional harm. The foundation for my response was now in place, I had evidence of their betrayal, a team of trusted allies with relevant expertise, and a preliminary strategy that would allow me to control the narrative and timing of their exposure. The next phase would involve refining the plan, coordinating with vendors and other participants, and maintaining perfect composure while continuing to interact with Tyler and Jessica as if nothing had changed. Tyler and Jessica had underestimated me completely, assuming that my love and trust made me weak rather than strong. They were about to discover that the woman they thought they were manipulating had resources, allies, and strategic capabilities they had never imagined. The next month would test everything I'd learned about leadership, strategy, and human nature. But I was beginning to believe that I was ready for the challenge. With my core team assembled and a preliminary strategy developed, the real work began. The next phase required me to maintain perfect normalcy with Tyler and Jessica while secretly implementing a complex plan that would expose their betrayal and ensure appropriate consequences. The level of deception required was ironic, given what they had put me through, but I was discovering capabilities I never knew I possessed. The first tactical decision involved the wedding venue itself. Riverside Gardens had been Tyler's choice, selected partly because his family's country club connections had secured us a premium date during peak wedding season. The venue coordinator, Sarah Kim, had worked with us for months and had developed what I thought was a genuine fondness for our love story. Now I needed to determine whether that relationship could be transformed into an alliance. I scheduled a meeting with Sarah under the pretense of finalizing last-minute details, but my real purpose was to assess whether she could be trusted with the truth and whether she would be willing to help implement modifications to our wedding plan. Sarah had been in the wedding business for over a decade, and I suspected she had seen her share of relationship drama and last-minute revelations. Sarah met me at the venue on a Tuesday afternoon when the gardens were quiet and we could talk privately. She led me through the ceremony space and reception area, pointing out final preparations and asking about details that still needed confirmation. Her enthusiasm for our wedding was evident, and I felt a pang of guilt about what I was planning to tell her. Sarah, before we finalize everything, I need to share something with you that's going to change our plans significantly. What I'm about to tell you needs to stay completely confidential until I'm ready to move forward. Sarah's expression immediately shifted to concern. She'd been in the business long enough to recognize when a bride was about to deliver devastating news. I told her about discovering Tyler's affair with Jessica, about the evidence I'd gathered, and about my decision to use the wedding itself as the venue for exposing their betrayal rather than simply canceling. Sarah listened without interrupting, her expression moving through shock, anger, and finally something that looked like professional admiration. Emma, in 12 years of coordinating weddings, I've never heard of anything quite like this. Most people would either cancel or go through with it while pretending nothing happened. What you're proposing is incredibly bold. Sarah's initial reaction was encouraging, but I needed to know whether she would be willing to actively participate in my plan rather than simply maintaining confidentiality. I understand if you can't be involved directly, I said carefully. But I need to know if you'd be willing to help implement some modifications to our timeline and setup without alerting Tyler or Jessica to what's happening. Sarah was quiet for several minutes, clearly weighing the professional and ethical implications of what I was asking. Finally, she spoke with the kind of determination that told me I had found another crucial ally. Emma, what Tyler and Jessica have done is beyond inappropriate. Using your wedding planning as cover for an affair is a violation of everything weddings are supposed to represent. If you want to use your own wedding to expose their behavior, I'll help you make it happen. Sarah's commitment to helping was both professionally motivated and personally principled. She took pride in creating celebrations of genuine love and commitment, and Tyler and Jessica's behavior was an insult to everything she worked to achieve. Over the next 2 hours, Sarah and I worked through the logistics of modifying our wedding. Plan without alerting Tyler or Jessica to the changes. Sarah's expertise in event coordination was invaluable for identifying opportunities and potential problems I never would have considered on my own. The key insight Sarah provided was that weddings follow predictable patterns and timelines that most participants take for granted. By making subtle adjustments to those patterns, we could create opportunities for revelation and accountability while maintaining the appearance of a normal celebration until the crucial moment. The beauty of this approach, Sarah explained, is that Tyler and Jessica will be expecting a traditional wedding timeline. They'll be focused on playing their roles as groom and maid of honor, which means they won't be paying attention to small changes in setup or sequence until it's too late. Sarah also pointed out that the vendor relationships I'd built over months of planning could be leveraged to ensure documentation and support for whatever revelations occurred during the wedding itself. The photographer, videographer, and other service providers had worked with Sarah for years and trusted her judgment about what would serve their clients' best interests. By the end of our meeting, Sarah had agreed to coordinate with Mia on timeline modifications and to ensure that key vendors were prepared for unexpected developments without being given details that might compromise operational security. She also offered to serve as a communication hub for last-minute adjustments that might be necessary as the wedding date approached. The next crucial conversation was with Lisa Bennett, our wedding photographer. Lisa had been recommended by Sarah and had impressed me with her artistic vision and professional demeanor during our engagement shoot. More importantly, she had a reputation for discretion and had photographed several weddings where family drama or unexpected developments required quick adaptation. I invited Lisa to coffee, ostensibly to discuss final shot lists and timeline details, but actually to determine whether she could be trusted with the truth and whether she would be willing to document whatever unfolded at the wedding in a way that protected my interests. Lisa arrived at our meeting with her usual enthusiasm for creative photography, bringing printed examples of shots she wanted to capture, and discussing lighting considerations for different times of day. Her passion for her craft was evident, but I needed to know how she would handle a situation that went far beyond traditional wedding photography. Lisa, our wedding might not unfold the way you're expecting. There are some personal circumstances that could lead to unexpected developments, and I need to know that you'll be prepared to document whatever happens in a way that serves my interests. Lisa's expression shifted to professional curiosity. She'd been photographing weddings long enough to know that family drama and relationship complications were occupational hazards, but something in my tone suggested this was more serious than typical wedding stress. I gave Lisa a carefully edited version of the situation, focusing on the potential for confrontation or revelation without providing details that might compromise my strategy. Lisa listened with the kind of focused attention that suggested she was already thinking through the professional implications. Emma, I've photographed weddings where family members got into arguments, where ex-partners showed up uninvited, where financial disasters emerged during the reception. My job is to document your day in a way that serves your interests, regardless of what unexpected developments occur. Lisa's professional commitment was exactly what I needed, but I also needed to know that she understood the potential legal implications of whatever she might witness and photograph. There's a possibility that whatever happens at our wedding could have legal ramifications. I need to know that any photos or videos you take would be available to support my position if necessary. Lisa nodded immediately. All of my wedding photography contracts include provisions for providing images for legal purposes if requested by the client. If you need documentation of events at your wedding, you'll have it. Lisa's willingness to serve as both artist and documentarian was crucial for my plan. Whatever revelations occurred at the wedding would need to be captured in ways that supported my narrative and provided evidence for any future legal or social consequences Tyler and Jessica might face. We spent another hour discussing how to modify her typical photography timeline to ensure comprehensive documentation of key moments without alerting other participants to the fact that evidence was being gathered. Lisa's creativity and experience were invaluable for developing approaches that would appear natural while serving strategic purposes. The third vendor conversation was with Jason Reed, our DJ and a friend from college who had built a successful event entertainment business in Austin. Jason had been enthusiastic about providing music for our wedding, partly because of our friendship, but mostly because he took genuine pride in creating perfect soundtracks for important celebrations. Jason was also someone I trusted completely. Having maintained our friendship through years of career changes and relationship developments, if anyone could be counted on to handle unexpected developments with grace and discretion, it was Jason. I called Jason and asked if he could meet me for drinks, suggesting we finalize the music timeline and discuss any last-minute requests. Jason agreed immediately, suggesting we meet at a bar near his studio where we could talk privately about wedding logistics. Jason arrived with his usual easy confidence, greeting me with the kind of warm hug that reminded me why our friendship had endured through college and beyond. He was genuinely excited about providing music for our wedding, and his enthusiasm made what I needed to tell him even more difficult. Jason, our wedding is going to be more complicated than you're expecting. There are some personal circumstances that might require quick adjustments to music and timeline, and I need to know that you'll be prepared to handle whatever develops. Jason's expression shifted to concern and curiosity. He'd known me long, enough to recognize when something serious was troubling me, and his protective instincts were immediately activated. I told Jason about discovering Tyler's affair, about the manipulation I'd uncovered, and about my decision to use the wedding as the venue for exposing their betrayal. Jason listened with growing anger and disbelief, occasionally muttering comments about Tyler's character that confirmed my sense that he had never completely trusted my fiancé. Emma, I always thought Tyler was too smooth, too perfect. Guys like that usually have something to hide. Jason's assessment aligned with observations from other friends who had expressed subtle reservations about Tyler over the years. Jason's willingness to help was immediate and unconditional. As both a friend and a professional, he was offended by Tyler and Jessica's behavior and eager to ensure they faced appropriate consequences. "What do you need from me?" Jason asked without hesitation. I outlined the role music and sound control would play in my strategy, emphasizing the importance of being able to manage audio for maximum impact at crucial moments. Jason's technical expertise and equipment capabilities were essential for ensuring that key revelations would be heard clearly by all wedding guests. Jason, there's going to be a moment when everything changes, when the truth comes out in a way that everyone will hear and understand. I need to know that you can control the sound system to ensure maximum clarity and impact. Jason grinned, with something that looked like anticipation. Emma, I've been DJing events for 8 years. I know how to manage audio for dramatic effect. Whatever you're planning, the sound will be perfect. Jason's technical skills and creative instincts were exactly what I needed for implementing the audio components of my strategy. His experience with crowd management and event flow would also be valuable for maintaining control during what would undoubtedly be a chaotic and emotional situation. By the end of our conversation, Jason had agreed to coordinate with Sarah and Mia on timeline adjustments and to ensure that all audio equipment was positioned for maximum effectiveness during the crucial moments of revelation. He also offered emotional support, reminding me that I had friends who cared about my welfare and were committed to helping me through this difficult situation. The vendor conversations had accomplished several important objectives. I now had commitments from key service providers to support my strategy while maintaining operational security. Sarah, Lisa, and Jason represented crucial capabilities that would be essential for implementing my plan successfully, while ensuring comprehensive documentation of whatever unfolded. More importantly, these conversations had confirmed that my instincts about Tyler and Jessica's behavior were shared by people who knew them in different contexts. The wedding industry professionals I'd worked with had developed sophisticated abilities to read character and relationships, and their validation of my concerns reinforced my confidence in the strategy I was developing. The next phase involved coordinating with my personal allies to ensure seamless communication and support during the implementation period. Rachel, David, Amanda, and Mia needed to understand their specific roles and responsibilities, as well as the backup plans that would be necessary if Tyler and Jessica discovered what we were doing before I was ready to move forward. Rachel's role was primarily emotional support and backup communication. As my sister, she would be at the wedding in a natural capacity, but she would also be monitoring Tyler and Jessica's behavior for signs that they suspected anything unusual. Rachel's teaching experience had given her exceptional observational skills, and her ability to read subtle changes in behavior would be crucial for maintaining operational security. David's responsibilities were legal protection and strategic consultation. He would be attending the wedding as my brother, but he would also be prepared to provide immediate legal advice if Tyler or Jessica attempted to retaliate in ways that crossed legal boundaries. David had also coordinated with his colleague Michael Torres to ensure backup legal support was available if needed. Amanda's expertise in documentation and evidence management made her responsible for ensuring that all interactions with Tyler and Jessica were properly recorded and preserved. Amanda had developed systems for capturing and organizing evidence that would be legally admissible while maintaining my privacy and protecting me from potential retaliation. Mia's role was overall coordination and timeline management. As our wedding planner, she would be directing the event in ways that appeared normal to most participants while actually implementing our modified strategy. Mia's relationships with vendors and her experience with complex event logistics made her the natural choice for operational leadership. The coordination between my personal allies and the wedding vendors required careful communication protocols that would prevent accidental disclosure, while ensuring everyone had the information they needed to perform their roles effectively. We developed code words and signals that would allow real-time adjustments without alerting Tyler and Jessica to what was happening. During this planning phase, I also had to maintain perfect normalcy in my daily interactions with Tyler and Jessica. This was perhaps the most challenging aspect of the entire strategy, requiring me to continue living with Tyler, planning our wedding with Jessica, and participating in social activities as if nothing had changed. Tyler's behavior during this period was particularly revealing. He seemed more attentive than usual, perhaps sensing some subtle change in my demeanor, even though I was working hard to appear normal. He brought me flowers more frequently, suggested romantic dinners, and expressed enthusiasm about our upcoming marriage that would have been touching if I hadn't known it was performance designed to maintain his deception. Jessica's behavior was equally calculated. She seemed to be working overtime to reinforce her role as my supportive friend and excited maid of honor. She suggested additional pre-wedding activities, offered to help with last-minute preparations, and expressed emotional anticipation about being part of our special day that made me sick to my stomach given what I knew about her true role in my relationship. The most difficult moments were when Tyler and Jessica interacted in front of me, maintaining their facade of casual friendship while exchanging subtle glances and touches that I now recognized as evidence of their ongoing affair. Watching them perform innocence while continuing their betrayal required every ounce of self-control I possessed. But these interactions also provided additional evidence for my growing documentation file. I began carrying a small recording device that captured conversations and interactions, building a comprehensive record of their continued deception even as our wedding date approached. The evidence I was gathering would serve multiple purposes, from legal protection to social accountability. 3 weeks before the wedding, Tyler suggested we have a final planning meeting with all the key participants to review timelines and responsibilities. The meeting would include Tyler, Jessica, my immediate family, and Tyler's parents, ostensibly to ensure everyone understood their roles and the day's schedule. I agreed to the meeting while internally recognizing it as a perfect opportunity to observe Tyler and Jessica's continued performance in front of our families. It would also allow me to assess whether anyone else had begun to suspect that something was wrong with our relationship or with Jessica's behavior. The meeting took place at Tyler's parents' home in Westlake, an elegant house that reflected their successful professional careers and social status. Linda and Robert Mitchell had always been gracious to me, though I sometimes sensed they considered me a slightly unexpected choice for their accomplished son. Now I wondered how they would react when they learned about Tyler's affair and the manipulation he had perpetrated. Tyler opened the meeting by expressing gratitude for everyone's support and excitement about the upcoming celebration. He spoke eloquently about love, commitment, and the importance of family in building a strong marriage. His performance was so convincing that I felt a moment of cognitive dissonance, wondering if I had somehow misunderstood what I'd witnessed and documented. But then, Jessica spoke about her honor at being chosen as maid of honor and her commitment to ensuring that our wedding day was perfect. As she talked about supporting our relationship and celebrating our love, I caught her exchanging a brief glance with Tyler that confirmed everything I knew about their ongoing deception. My parents contributed their own expressions of joy and anticipation, with my mother becoming emotional as she talked about watching her daughter marry such a wonderful man. My father offered Tyler his continued respect and gratitude for the happiness he brought to our family. Rachel managed to participate appropriately, while occasionally catching my eye with expressions that confirmed she was cataloging every moment of Tyler and Jessica's performance. By the end of the meeting, I had additional evidence of Tyler and Jessica's continued deception, even as they participated in planning discussions with our families. They had maintained their affair and their manipulation right up until this final family meeting, showing no signs of guilt or consideration for the pain they were causing. The meeting also confirmed that neither set of parents suspected anything unusual about Tyler and Jessica's relationship or behavior. This was both reassuring, since it meant my own performance was convincing, and concerning, since it demonstrated how skillfully Tyler and Jessica had maintained their deception across multiple relationships and social contexts. As the wedding date approached, the final preparations intensified. Tyler became increasingly affectionate and attentive, perhaps driven by guilt or by a desire to ensure I remained unsuspecting until after our marriage was legally finalized. Jessica ramped up her performance as the devoted maid of honor, offering additional help with preparations and expressing growing excitement about the celebration. Meanwhile, my team of allies was implementing the final components of our strategy. Sarah coordinated timeline modifications with vendors, ensuring that key moments would unfold according to our plan rather than traditional wedding protocols. Lisa positioned additional equipment for comprehensive documentation. Jason prepared audio modifications that would ensure clear communication during crucial revelations. Rachel, David, Amanda, and Mia reviewed their individual responsibilities and backup protocols. The night before the wedding, I sat in my childhood bedroom at my parents' house, where I was staying according to tradition, reviewing the plan one final time. Tomorrow would test everything I'd learned about strategy, leadership, and human nature. Tyler and Jessica would face the consequences of their betrayal in front of 150 people who thought they knew them. The woman who had discovered her fiancé's affair 4 weeks earlier had been devastated and uncertain. The woman preparing for tomorrow's wedding was strategic, prepared, and supported by people who understood the importance of ensuring that manipulation and betrayal faced appropriate consequences. Tyler and Jessica had underestimated me completely, and tomorrow they would learn exactly how much they had misjudged the person they thought they were deceiving. The final phase of preparation was complete. Tomorrow would determine whether months of strategic planning and careful coordination would achieve the justice I was seeking, or whether Tyler and Jessica would somehow manage to turn the situation to their advantage. But as I reviewed the evidence I'd gathered, the allies I'd assembled, and the plan we'd developed, I felt confident that I was ready for whatever challenges the next day might bring. Tyler and Jessica had chosen to build their relationship on deception and betrayal. Tomorrow, they would discover that those choices came with consequences they had never anticipated, delivered by someone they had consistently underestimated. The wedding they thought would mark their successful manipulation of me would instead become the venue for their public reckoning with the truth. The morning of October 15th dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of perfect autumn weather that wedding planners dream of and brides pray for. As I woke up in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by the familiar comfort of family photos and high school memorabilia, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Today was the day Tyler Mitchell and Jessica Parker would face the consequences of their betrayal, and I was ready. My mother knocked softly on my door at 7:30, carrying a tray with coffee and toast, her face glowing with the kind of maternal pride that made my heart ache. She had no idea that today would be nothing like the fairy tale wedding she'd been anticipating for months. "Good morning, my beautiful bride," she said in Spanish, setting the tray on my dresser and pulling back the curtains to let in the morning light. "Are you ready for the happiest day of your life?" I smiled at her, genuinely moved by her excitement and love, even as I prepared to shatter the illusion she'd been cherishing. "I'm ready, Mama. Today is going to be exactly what it needs to be." My phone buzzed with a series of messages from my team. Rachel had texted that she was on her way over to help me get ready, but would arrive early to review final details. David sent a brief message confirming that he and Michael Torres were prepared for any legal complications that might arise. Amanda reported that all documentation systems were in place and ready to capture whatever unfolded. Mia's message was longer, reviewing the modified timeline and confirming that all vendors were prepared for the unconventional day ahead. Most importantly, Sarah Kim had sent a message confirming that everything at Riverside Gardens was set up according to our special arrangements, and that Tyler and Jessica remained completely unaware that anything had changed from their expectations. I showered and began the careful process of preparing for what would be the most challenging performance of my life. Every detail of my appearance needed to be perfect, not because I was marrying the love of my life as originally planned, but because I needed to project confidence and control when the truth was finally revealed. Rachel arrived as I was starting my makeup, carrying a small bag of emergency supplies, and wearing the determined expression that told me she was fully prepared for whatever role she needed to play. She hugged me tightly, whispering in my ear, "You've got this, Hermana. Tyler and Jessica have no idea what's coming." As we worked together on my hair and makeup, Rachel filled me in on some final intelligence she'd gathered. She'd spoken with several wedding guests the previous evening at the rehearsal dinner, and Tyler's performance as the devoted groom had been flawless. He'd given a toast about his love for me that had brought tears to several guests' eyes, while Jessica had played the role of supportive maid of honor with equal skill. "They're completely convinced they've pulled this off," Rachel reported as she helped pin my veil. "Tyler was actually telling people how lucky he is to have found someone as trusting and loving as you. The irony would be funny if it weren't so infuriating." Jessica had also maintained her performance perfectly, expressing excitement about my special day and gratitude for our friendship. She'd even made comments to other bridesmaids about how she hoped to find a love like Tyler, and I shared, a level of hypocrisy that was breathtaking in its audacity. By 10 o'clock, I was fully dressed in my wedding gown, an elegant creation that had taken months to select and alter to perfection. Looking at myself in the full-length mirror, I saw a bride who appeared radiant and confident, ready to marry the man of her dreams. The image was perfect and completely at odds with the reality of what I was about to do. My parents arrived to take photos and share private moments before we left for the venue. My father, dressed in his best suit and wearing an expression of pride and emotion I'd rarely seen, took my hands and told me how honored he was to walk me down the aisle to such a good man. My mother cried as she looked at me, telling me I was the most beautiful bride she'd ever seen. These moments with my parents were precious and heartbreaking, knowing that their joy and anticipation would soon be replaced by shock and concern for my welfare. But they were also necessary. both for maintaining my cover and for giving me strength for what lay ahead. At 11:30, our small caravan departed for Riverside Gardens. I rode with my parents and Rachel, while my other bridesmaids followed in a separate car. During the drive, I reviewed the plan one final time with Rachel, confirming signals and timing while my parents chatted excitedly in the front seat about the beautiful day and perfect weather. Riverside Gardens looked absolutely stunning as we arrived. The ceremony space was decorated with burgundy and gold flowers that complemented the autumn setting perfectly, while the reception area sparkled with elegant lighting and carefully arranged tables. Sarah Kim had outdone herself creating a beautiful venue for what should have been a celebration of love and commitment. Sarah met us at the bridal suite, her professional demeanor masking the knowledge we shared about what was actually going to unfold. She helped coordinate the final preparations while subtly confirming that Tyler and Jessica were both on schedule and unsuspecting. "The groom is getting ready with his groomsmen in the men's lounge," Sarah reported. "Very relaxed and happy. The maid of honor arrived early and has been helping coordinate with the other bridesmaids. Everything appears completely normal from their perspective." My bridesmaids arrived in a flurry of excitement and last-minute preparations. Jessica was among them, looking radiant in her burgundy dress and playing her role as devoted maid of honor with Academy Award-worthy skill. She fussed over my appearance, expressed excitement about the ceremony, and made touching comments about our friendship that made me want to vomit. "Emma, you look absolutely perfect," Jessica gushed as she adjusted my veil. "Tyler is going to cry when he sees you walking down the aisle. You two are so lucky to have found each other." The level of manipulation and deception in her performance was extraordinary. She was literally helping me prepare to marry the man she'd been sleeping with while expressing joy about our happiness and gratitude for our friendship. The psychological compartmentalization required for such behavior was disturbing to contemplate. At 12:15, Sarah announced that it was time for the ceremony to begin. The guests were all seated, the musicians were ready, and the groom was waiting at the altar. From the outside, everything appeared to be proceeding according to a traditional wedding timeline. But Sarah, Mia, and I knew that the ceremony would unfold very differently than what Tyler and Jessica were expecting. Instead of the traditional exchange of vows and rings that would legally bind Tyler and me in marriage, today's ceremony would become a public revelation of truth and accountability. As my bridesmaids lined up for the processional, I took one last look at Jessica, studying her face for any sign that she suspected what was about to happen. She met my eyes with what appeared to be genuine warmth and excitement, completely convinced that she had successfully manipulated both Tyler and me right up until our wedding day. The processional music began, and my bridesmaids made their way down the aisle to where Tyler waited with his groomsmen. Through the window of the bridal suite, I could see him standing at the altar in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, smiling with apparent joy and anticipation as he watched his accomplice in betrayal walk toward him, carrying flowers and wearing the dress of honor in our wedding. When it was time for my entrance, my father offered me his arm with tears in his eyes. "Ready, Mija? Time to marry that wonderful man and start your new life together." I squeezed his arm gently, drawing strength from his love and support, even as I prepared to shatter his expectations about what kind of day this would be. "I'm ready, Papa. Thank you for always believing in me and supporting my decisions." The bridal march began, and the guests rose to their feet as my father and I appeared at the back of the ceremony space. I could see Tyler at the altar, his face lighting up with what appeared to be genuine emotion as he watched me approach. Jessica stood beside the other bridesmaids, beaming with the kind of joy that would be appropriate for a true friend celebrating my happiness. As we walked down the aisle, I scanned the assembled guests, seeing the faces of family members and friends who had gathered to celebrate what they believed was the beginning of my happily ever after. Tyler's parents sat in the front row, elegant and proud. My extended family filled several rows, having traveled from across Texas to witness my wedding. Colleagues from both our workplaces, college friends, and community acquaintances had all taken time from their busy lives to share in our supposed joy. None of them had any idea that they were about to witness something unprecedented in their experience with weddings. When we reached the altar, my father kissed my cheek and placed my hand in Tyler's, just as tradition dictated. Tyler's eyes were bright with what looked like love and anticipation, and his smile was warm and genuine. For a moment, I felt a flicker of doubt about what I was about to do. Could I have been wrong about what I'd seen and heard? Was there some explanation for Tyler and Jessica's behavior that I hadn't considered? But then I caught Jessica's eye, and I saw something that confirmed everything I knew about their betrayal. For just a moment, her mask of supportive friendship slipped, and I saw calculation and satisfaction in her expression. She thought she had won. She thought she had successfully manipulated me into marrying Tyler while maintaining her position as his mistress. The officiant began the ceremony with traditional words about the significance of marriage and the commitment Tyler and I were about to make to each other. Tyler held my hands and gazed into my eyes with apparent devotion, playing his role as the loving groom with the same skill he'd demonstrated for months of deception. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Tyler and Emma in marriage, the officiant began. Marriage is a sacred commitment, built on foundations of trust, honesty, and mutual respect. The irony of those words, given what I knew about Tyler's character and behavior, was almost overwhelming. But I maintained my composure, waiting for the moment when the ceremony would deviate from traditional expectations. That moment came when the officiant reached the portion of the ceremony where he would normally ask if anyone had objections to the marriage. Instead of the traditional phrasing, however, he spoke words that Sarah and I had carefully crafted for this occasion. Before we proceed with the exchange of vows, I want to take a moment to reflect on the importance of truth and honesty in marriage. A successful marriage cannot be built on deception or betrayal. It requires both partners to come to their union with clean hearts and honest intentions. I saw Tyler's expression flicker slightly, perhaps sensing that something was different about the ceremony's phrasing, but he maintained his loving gaze and confident posture. Emma, the officiant continued following our modified script, do you come to this marriage with complete honesty about your feelings and intentions toward Tyler? I do, I replied clearly, my voice carrying across the silent ceremony space. I have been completely honest in my love and commitment to Tyler throughout our relationship. And Tyler, do you come to this marriage with complete honesty about your feelings and intentions toward Emma? Tyler's response was immediate and confident. I do. I love Emma completely and have been faithful to her in every way. The lie was so smooth and convincing that several guests smiled at his romantic declaration. Jessica, standing with the bridesmaids, maintained her expression of joy and support. This was the moment I had been preparing for over the past month. Everything I had planned, all the evidence I had gathered, all the allies I had assembled, had led to this point where Tyler's lies would be exposed in front of everyone who thought they knew him. Tyler, I said, my voice clear and steady, I'm afraid that's not entirely true. A murmur went through the assembled guests as they realized something unexpected was happening. Tyler's expression shifted from confident love to confusion and concern. Emma, what are you talking about? He asked, his voice still controlled but with an edge of uncertainty that hadn't been there moments before. I turned to address the guests directly, my voice carrying clearly across the ceremony space thanks to Jason's careful audio setup. Friends and family, I'm sorry to interrupt what you thought would be a traditional wedding ceremony, but I've discovered something that I need to share with all of you before we proceed. The murmur from the guests grew louder, and I could see confusion and concern on faces throughout the ceremony space. Tyler's parents looked shocked, while my own family appeared bewildered but supportive. 4 weeks ago, I came home early from a business trip, and discovered Tyler in our bedroom with my maid of honor, Jessica Parker. They have been having an affair for months, using our wedding planning as cover for their relationship. The reaction from the guests was immediate and dramatic. Gasps and exclamations erupted throughout the ceremony space as people processed what I had just revealed. Tyler's face went white, while Jessica looked like she was about to be sick. "Emma, that's not true," Tyler said quickly, his voice rising, to be heard over the crowd's reaction. "I don't know what you think you saw, but you're wrong." "I have recordings of your conversations," I replied calmly, pulling out my phone. "Would you like me to play them for everyone here?" The threat of public evidence immediately changed Tyler's demeanor. The confident charm that had defined his personality throughout our relationship crumbled, replaced by panic and desperation. "Emma, please, we can discuss this privately. You don't need to do this in front of everyone." "Actually, Tyler, I think I do. You see, your affair with Jessica wasn't just a betrayal of our relationship. It was a calculated deception that involved using our wedding planning, our shared home, and my trust as cover for your relationship with her. You've lied to me, to our families, and to everyone here who believed in us." Jessica finally found her voice, stepping forward from the bridesmaids lineup. "Emma, you're misunderstanding what you saw. Tyler and I were just talking, we never—" "Jessica," I interrupted. "I have recordings of you discussing how to manage Tyler's relationship with me after we were married so you could continue your affair. I have evidence of text messages, hotel, receipts, and witness testimony. Please don't insult everyone's intelligence by continuing to lie." The evidence I referenced was carefully assembled and documented, thanks to Amanda's expertise and David's legal guidance. Everything I claimed was provable and admissible, should Tyler or Jessica attempt to deny or retaliate. Tyler's father stood up from his seat in the front row, his face red with anger and humiliation. "Tyler, is this true? Have you been cheating on Emma with her maid of honor?" The direct question from his father, asked in front of 150 wedding guests, finally broke through Tyler's attempts at damage control. He looked around at the faces of family members, friends, and colleagues, all waiting for his answer, and realized that denial was no longer possible. "Dad, I can explain," Tyler began, but his father cut him off with a gesture of disgust. "There's nothing to explain, son. You've embarrassed our family and betrayed a woman who loved you. I'm ashamed of you." The public condemnation from his own father was devastating to Tyler, who had always prided himself on his family's respect and approval. But the social consequences were only beginning. My mother stood up from her seat, her face wet with tears, but her voice strong with determination. "Emma, Mija, what do you need from us? How can we help you?" The immediate support from my family, offered publicly in front of all the wedding guests, was both touching and strategically important. It demonstrated that the people who knew me best believed my accusations and stood ready to support whatever actions I took. "What I need," I said, addressing the entire gathering, "is for everyone to understand that Tyler and Jessica made deliberate choices to deceive and manipulate me. They used our engagement, our wedding planning, and our shared life as cover for their affair. They showed no respect for my feelings, our family's investments in this celebration, or the commitments they made to support our relationship." I turned back to Tyler, who was standing frozen at the altar, his dreams of a successful deception crumbling around him. "Tyler, you told Jessica that marrying me was a smart move because I was stable and would make a good mother, while she was more exciting but too unreliable for marriage. You discussed how to manage both relationships after our wedding, so you could continue your affair while keeping me as your convenient wife." The specific details of their recorded conversations, shared publicly, made it impossible for Tyler to maintain any pretense of innocence or good intentions. The guests could see that this wasn't a misunderstanding or a moment of weakness, but a calculated plan to manipulate and deceive. Jessica, meanwhile, had been edging toward the exit during my revelations, clearly hoping to escape before facing direct accountability for her role in the betrayal. But Rachel, positioned strategically near the ceremony space exit, blocked her path with a sweet smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Jessica, where are you going? Don't you want to stay and explain your role in this situation to everyone who's here?" Trapped between my accusations and Rachel's strategic positioning, Jessica finally abandoned her facade of innocence and switched to attack mode. "Emma, you're being ridiculous. Tyler and I are just friends. If you're so insecure that you can't handle your fiancé having female friends, maybe you're not ready for marriage." The attempt to turn the situation around and paint me as the unreasonable one was exactly what David had predicted Jessica would try. But after weeks of preparation and with comprehensive evidence at my disposal, I was ready for her deflection tactics. "Jessica, I have recordings of you and Tyler discussing your affair, making plans to continue it after our marriage, and laughing about my insecurities that you had shared with Tyler from our private conversations. This isn't about friendship or insecurity. This is about betrayal and manipulation." Amanda, positioned near the photographer's equipment, gave Lisa a discreet signal to ensure comprehensive documentation of Jessica's responses and reactions. Everything that was happening would be preserved for potential legal proceedings and social accountability. The confrontation continued for several more minutes, with Tyler attempting damage control while Jessica oscillated between denial and attacks on my character. But the evidence I had gathered was overwhelming, and the public nature of their exposure made it impossible for them to maintain their deceptions. Finally, Tyler's mother stood up and addressed her son directly. "Tyler, stop embarrassing yourself and our family further. You've been caught in lies and betrayal. The honorable thing to do now is admit what you've done and face the consequences." The public condemnation from both his parents, delivered in front of 150 wedding guests, was the final blow to Tyler's attempts at maintaining his image. He looked around at the faces of family members, friends, and colleagues, seeing disappointment, anger, and disgust reflected back at him. "Fine," he said finally, his voice defeated. "Yes, Jessica and I have been seeing each other. But Emma, it wasn't supposed to hurt you. We were going to end it after the wedding." The admission, finally, extracted after weeks of deception, was both vindicating and pathetic. Tyler was still trying to minimize his behavior and paint it as something that wouldn't have hurt me, demonstrating that he fundamentally didn't understand the magnitude of his betrayal. "Tyler," I replied calmly, "you were planning to continue the affair after our marriage. You discussed how to manage both relationships long-term. You weren't planning to end anything. You were planning to make me your unknowing accomplice in my own deception." With Tyler's admission and the evidence I had presented, the truth was finally out in the open. The wedding guests sat in stunned silence, processing the magnitude of what they had witnessed. Some were crying, some were angry, and some were simply shocked by the unprecedented nature of what had unfolded. Sarah Kim stepped forward at this point, her professional demeanor intact despite the extraordinary circumstances. "Ladies and gentlemen, obviously this ceremony will not be proceeding as originally planned. We ask for your patience as we make arrangements for everyone to depart safely and comfortably. The practical needs of managing 150 confused and emotional wedding guests required immediate attention, but I had one more important announcement to make. Before everyone leaves, I want you to know that the reception will still take place as scheduled. Tyler and Jessica will not be attending, but the rest of us can still celebrate the truth coming to light and the importance of honesty in all our relationships. The decision to continue with the reception, minus the two people who had betrayed me, was strategic as well as therapeutic. It demonstrated that their actions hadn't destroyed me or ruined the day entirely. It also provided an opportunity for the social consequences of their behavior to be fully processed and discussed by everyone who had witnessed their exposure. Tyler and Jessica left the venue separately, both escorted by security that Sarah had discreetly arranged. Tyler's departure was watched by his parents with expressions of disappointment and shame, while Jessica slipped away with none of the support she had counted on from people who now understood her true character. The reception that followed was unlike any wedding celebration I had ever attended. Instead of toasts to the happy couple, there were expressions of support for my courage in exposing the truth. Instead of celebrating a new marriage, we celebrated the importance of integrity and the strength it takes to stand up to manipulation and betrayal. My family and friends rallied around me with love and admiration for how I had handled the situation. David and Amanda confirmed that all evidence had been properly documented and preserved for any future legal proceedings. Mia received praise from other wedding professionals for her role in coordinating such a complex and sensitive situation. Most importantly, I felt a sense of completion and justice that I hadn't expected. Tyler and Jessica had faced immediate social consequences for their betrayal, losing the respect of family members, friends, and professional colleagues. The financial consequences would follow, as Tyler's family dealt with the costs of a canceled wedding, and both Tyler and Jessica faced the professional ramifications of their exposed behavior. In the weeks that followed, the social consequences of Tyler and Jessica's exposure continued to unfold. Tyler's reputation in Austin's pharmaceutical sales community was severely damaged, affecting his career prospects and professional relationships. Jessica's freelance graphic design business suffered as word spread about her behavior, with several clients terminating contracts and potential projects disappearing. More importantly, both Tyler and Jessica were forced to confront the reality that their actions had consequences beyond their immediate relationship. Family members, friends, and colleagues all had to reconsider their opinions of two people they thought they knew and trusted. The legal consequences were also significant. David and Michael Torres helped me pursue civil action for the emotional distress and financial damages Tyler and Jessica had caused. The evidence I had gathered made their liability clear, and both were required to pay substantial settlements that covered therapy costs, career counseling, and punitive damages for their deliberate deception. 6 months after the wedding that never was, I had built a new life that was healthier and more authentic than anything I had experienced during my relationship with Tyler. The process of exposing their betrayal and ensuring appropriate consequences had been difficult and emotionally exhausting, but it had also been empowering in ways I hadn't anticipated. I had learned that I was capable of strategic thinking and decisive action under pressure. I had discovered the value of building alliances with people who shared my values and were willing to support justice over convenience. Most importantly, I had proven to myself that I didn't have to accept manipulation and betrayal as the price of love and acceptance. The wedding venue cancellation fees were indeed paid by Tyler and Jessica as part of their legal settlement, along with compensation for the emotional and financial damage they had caused. The money was important, but the principle it represented was even more significant. They had been held accountable for their choices in ways that matched the magnitude of their betrayal. Tyler eventually moved to Dallas, starting over in a new city where his reputation hadn't been damaged by his exposed behavior. Jessica left Austin entirely, relocating to Colorado, where she attempted to rebuild her freelance career. Both faced years of rebuilding trust and credibility that they had destroyed through their actions. As for me, I emerged from the experience, stronger and wiser, with a clearer understanding of my own worth and the kind of relationships I wanted to build. The wedding that was supposed to celebrate my marriage to Tyler had instead become a celebration of truth, integrity, and the importance of holding people accountable for their actions. The story became legendary in Austin's social and professional circles, not as a cautionary tale about trust and betrayal, but as an example of how to respond to manipulation with strength, strategy, and grace. The woman who had discovered her Fiancé's affair had chosen not to suffer in silence or lash out in anger, but to ensure that justice was served in a way that protected her interests and held the betrayers accountable for their actions. Tyler and Jessica had gambled that they could manipulate and deceive me without facing consequences. They had lost that gamble in the most public and complete way possible, and the results had changed all our lives forever. The wedding venue, cancellation fee was indeed theirs to pay, along with every other cost of the choices they had made. 2 years after the wedding that changed everything, I stood in the kitchen of my new townhouse in South Austin, preparing dinner for a celebration that would have been unimaginable during my relationship with Tyler. The occasion was my promotion to senior marketing director at the tech startup, a position that represented not just professional advancement, but personal validation of the strength and clarity I'd discovered through surviving betrayal and orchestrating justice. The guest list for tonight's dinner party reflected the profound changes in my life since that October day at Riverside Gardens. Rachel and her husband Mark would be there, along with David and his new girlfriend, a fellow attorney he'd met through the professional networks that had expanded after helping me navigate the legal complexities of my situation. Mia was bringing her fiancé, a chef she'd met while planning a wedding for one of his restaurant clients. Amanda had become one of my closest friends, our bond forged through the crisis but sustained by genuine compatibility and shared values. Most significantly, I was cooking for someone special of my own. Carlos Mendoza was nothing like Tyler in appearance, personality, or character. Where Tyler had been smooth and calculating, Carlos was genuine and transparent. Where Tyler had been charming but manipulative, Carlos was kind but honest. Where Tyler had built relationships on deception and control, Carlos approached connections with openness and respect. I'd met Carlos 8 months after the wedding disaster, at a community volunteer event where we were both helping build a playground for a local elementary school. He was a civil engineer who specialized in sustainable infrastructure, someone who built things that lasted and served communities rather than pursuing profit at any cost. Our relationship had developed slowly and naturally, built on friendship and mutual respect rather than the intense passion and grand gestures that had characterized my time with Tyler. Carlos knew the full story of what had happened with Tyler. And Jessica? Not because I'd dumped the details on him early in our relationship, but because he'd asked thoughtful questions and listened carefully to my answers over the months we'd gotten to know each other. His response to learning about my past had been compassion for what I'd endured and admiration for how I'd handled it, rather than judgment or concern about drama. The legal settlement with Tyler and Jessica had been finalized 6 months after the wedding, resulting in substantial compensation for the emotional distress, financial damages, and punitive consequences they deserved for their calculated deception. David and Michael Torres had been thorough in documenting every aspect of their manipulation, from the wedding costs to the therapy expenses to the career counseling I'd needed to rebuild my confidence in professional settings. Tyler had initially tried to fight the settlement, hiring his own attorney and attempting to paint me as vindictive and unreasonable, but the evidence Amanda had helped me gather was overwhelming, and his legal team eventually advised him to accept the settlement rather than face a public trial that would have been even more damaging to his already ruined reputation. Jessica had been more cooperative in the legal proceedings, perhaps recognizing that her financial situation made a prolonged legal battle impossible. She'd also been required to provide written apologies to me and to my family, acknowledging the calculated nature of her betrayal and accepting responsibility for the pain she had caused. The apologies had been legally mandated rather than genuine, but they served the purpose of creating official acknowledgement of her wrongdoing. The financial compensation had allowed me to purchase my townhouse, invest in additional education and professional development, and build a foundation of security that made me less vulnerable to future manipulation. More importantly, the process of seeking justice had taught me that I deserved relationships based on honesty and respect, and that I had the strength to demand better treatment from the people in my life. The social consequences for Tyler and Jessica had been as significant as the legal ones. Tyler's reputation in Austin's pharmaceutical industry had been permanently damaged, affecting his ability to build the professional relationships that sales success required. He'd eventually relocated to Houston, where he'd taken a position with lower status and compensation than what he'd enjoyed before his exposure. Jessica's freelance graphic design business had collapsed entirely after word spread about her behavior. The creative community in Austin was relatively small and closely connected, and her violation of basic friendship and professional ethics had made her persona non grata among potential clients and collaborators. She'd moved to Portland, attempting to start over in a city where her reputation hadn't preceded her. Both Tyler and Jessica had paid financial and social prices for their betrayal that matched the magnitude of their calculated deception. They had learned that actions have consequences, and that manipulating and betraying people who trust you comes with costs they hadn't anticipated. But the most significant changes had been in my own life and relationships. The experience of discovering their betrayal and orchestrating appropriate consequences had fundamentally altered how I approached friendships, romantic relationships, and professional interactions. I'd learned to trust my instincts when something felt wrong, to ask direct questions rather than making assumptions, and to expect honesty and respect as basic requirements rather than special gifts. My relationship with my family had also evolved in positive ways. My parents had been shaken by how completely Tyler had deceived them, leading to conversations about judgment and intuition that brought us closer together. Rachel and I had always been close, but working together to expose Tyler and Jessica's betrayal had created a bond of mutual respect and admiration that enriched our sister relationship. David had gained a new appreciation for my strategic thinking and strength under pressure, treating me more as an equal partner in family decisions rather than a younger sister who needed protection. The experience had also influenced his own approach to relationships, making him more careful about evaluating character and more supportive of partners who demonstrated integrity under pressure. The professional consequences of my experience had been entirely positive. Word had spread through Austin's business community about how I'd handled the situation with Tyler and Jessica, and my reputation for strategic thinking and graceful problem-solving had actually enhanced my career prospects. The skills I'd developed in planning and executing my response to their betrayal had translated directly into improved performance in marketing strategy and campaign management. My promotion to senior marketing director had come with increased responsibilities for complex projects and crisis management, areas where my experience with handling Tyler and Jessica's manipulation had provided valuable training. I'd also been invited to speak at professional development events about leadership under pressure and maintaining integrity in difficult situations. Tonight's dinner party was celebrating not just my promotion, but the 2-year anniversary of what I'd come to think of as my Liberation Day. October 15th had become a personal holiday, marking the moment when I'd chosen to take control of my own narrative, rather than allowing Tyler and Jessica to dictate the terms of my life. Carlos arrived first, carrying flowers and a bottle of wine, his warm smile and genuine excitement about my promotion, reminding me of what healthy relationships actually looked like. He kissed me gently and asked about my day, listening attentively to my answers and sharing his own experiences with the kind of open communication that had been entirely absent from my relationship with Tyler. "I'm proud of you," he said simply, as he helped me arrange the flowers in a vase. "Not just for the promotion, but for everything you've built since we met. You've created a life that reflects your values and your strength." Carlos's support was uncomplicated and genuine, offered without expectation of anything in return. He celebrated my successes because he cared about my happiness, not because my achievements reflected well on him or served his own interests. The contrast with Tyler's manipulative version of support was stark and ongoing validation of how much my standards for relationships had improved. Rachel and Mark arrived next, followed quickly by David and his girlfriend Sarah, creating the kind of warm family gathering that had become more frequent and meaningful since the crisis with Tyler. My family had gained a new appreciation for honesty and authenticity in relationships, and our celebrations had become more genuine and less performative as a result. Mia and her fiancé brought stories from recent weddings she'd planned, including several where she'd had to manage family drama and relationship complications. Her expertise in handling difficult personalities and complex emotions had been enhanced by her experience helping me navigate the Tyler situation, making her even more valuable to clients facing their own challenges. Amanda arrived with her usual professional competence and personal warmth, carrying a bottle of champagne and news about a promotion of her own. The crisis management skills she'd developed while helping me document Tyler and Jessica's betrayal had proved valuable in her HR role, leading to recognition and advancement within our company. As we gathered around my dining room table, sharing food and conversation in the warm light of candles and laughter, I felt profound gratitude for the journey that had brought me to this moment. The woman who had discovered her fiancé's betrayal 2 years earlier had been devastated and uncertain, questioning her judgment and wondering if she'd ever be able to trust again. The woman hosting tonight's celebration was confident in her own worth, surrounded by people who demonstrated genuine care and respect, and building a life based on authentic values rather than others' expectations. The transformation hadn't been easy or quick, but it had been complete and lasting. During dinner, David raised his glass for a toast that captured the significance of what we were celebrating. To Emma, who showed all of us that grace under pressure isn't about avoiding conflict, but about facing it with intelligence and integrity. Your strength in handling an impossible situation has inspired everyone who knows you. The toast was followed by others, each person sharing appreciation for different aspects of my journey and transformation. Rachel talked about my courage in choosing truth over convenience. Mia praised my strategic thinking and careful planning. Amanda highlighted my commitment to justice and accountability. Carlos spoke about my openness to building new relationships based on honesty and mutual respect. As the evening progressed, conversation naturally turned to updates about Tyler and Jessica, though more from curiosity than ongoing resentment. Through professional networks and mutual acquaintances, we'd learned that both were struggling to rebuild their lives and reputations after the consequences of their choices. Tyler's career had never recovered from the damage to his reputation, forcing him to accept positions with less prestige and lower compensation than he'd enjoyed before his exposure. His personal relationships had also suffered, as word about his capacity for deception and manipulation had spread through his social circles. The charm and confidence that had once made him attractive to potential partners now seemed calculating and untrustworthy to people who knew his history. Jessica's attempts to restart her career in Portland had met with limited success, partly because of the tight-knit nature of creative communities and the ease with which professional reputations could be researched and verified. Her betrayal of friendship and professional ethics had created a pattern of behavior that potential clients and collaborators found concerning, affecting her ability to build the trust necessary for successful freelance work. Both had paid ongoing prices for their choices to deceive and manipulate, facing consequences that extended far beyond the immediate exposure and legal settlement. They had learned that character and reputation, once damaged by deliberate betrayal, were difficult and sometimes impossible to fully restore. But my focus had long since shifted away from their consequences to my own growth and happiness. The energy I had once devoted to understanding and responding to their manipulation was now invested in building positive relationships and pursuing meaningful goals. The strategic thinking skills I'd developed in exposing their betrayal had been redirected toward career advancement and community involvement. As the dinner party wound down and guests began to leave, Carlos helped me clear dishes and tidy up, the kind of domestic partnership that felt natural and supportive rather than performative or calculated. Our relationship had developed without drama or manipulation, built on the foundation of mutual respect and shared values that I now understood were essential for healthy connections. Standing in my kitchen as Carlos dried dishes and told me about his plans for a sustainable housing project, I reflected on how completely my life had changed since that October morning when I'd discovered Tyler's betrayal. The woman who had been devastated by discovering her fiancé's affair, had become someone who could recognize manipulation, demand accountability, and build relationships based on genuine compatibility rather than fantasy or desperation. The experience with Tyler and Jessica had been painful and challenging, but it had also been transformative in ways I couldn't have anticipated. I'd learned that I was capable of strategic thinking and decisive action under enormous pressure. I'd discovered the importance of building alliances with people who shared my values and were willing to support justice over convenience. Most importantly, I'd proven to myself that I deserved better treatment and had the strength to demand it. The wedding venue cancellation fees had indeed been paid by Tyler and Jessica, along with every other cost of the choices they had made. But the true victory hadn't been financial compensation or social consequences for them. The real triumph had been my own transformation from someone who accepted manipulation as the price of love to someone who insisted on honesty and respect as basic requirements for any meaningful relationship. 2 years after the wedding that never was, I had built a life that reflected my authentic values and goals, rather than others' expectations or manipulations. The townhouse I owned represented financial independence and security. The relationships I maintained were based on genuine affection and mutual respect. The career I was building honored my abilities and ambitions without requiring me to compromise my integrity. As Carlos and I settled on my couch with glasses of wine, talking about plans for the weekend and sharing comfortable silence, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from surviving betrayal and emerging stronger. Tyler and Jessica had gambled that they could deceive and manipulate me without facing consequences. They had lost that gamble completely, and I had won something far more valuable than revenge or even justice. I had won the right to be myself, honestly and completely, surrounded by people who valued authenticity over performance and character over charm. The woman who had been betrayed had become someone who could recognize and respond to manipulation with intelligence and grace. The experience that was supposed to destroy me had instead revealed capabilities and strength I never knew I possessed. The story of Tyler, Jessica, and the wedding that exposed their betrayal had become legendary in Austin's social circles, not as a cautionary tale about trust and vulnerability, but as an example of how to respond to manipulation with strategic thinking and appropriate consequences. The woman who had chosen to reveal her fiancé's affair at their own wedding had demonstrated that victims of betrayal didn't have to suffer in silence or lash out in anger. Sometimes justice required creativity, patience, and the courage to demand accountability in ways that others might consider unconventional. Sometimes protecting yourself meant taking control of the narrative rather than allowing manipulators to dictate how your story would end. Sometimes the most powerful response to betrayal was refusing to be defined by others' actions while ensuring they faced consequences for their choices. Tyler and Jessica had underestimated me completely, assuming that my love and trust made me weak rather than strong. They had learned, in the most public and comprehensive way possible, that betraying someone's trust comes with costs they hadn't anticipated. The wedding venue cancellation fee had been the least of what they'd ultimately paid for their choices. As I fell asleep that night in my own home, secure in relationships built on honesty and respect, I felt profound gratitude for the journey that had brought me to this point. The woman who had discovered her fiancé's betrayal had survived, thrived, and built something beautiful from the ashes of deception and manipulation. The story was complete, the justice had been served, and the life that emerged from the ruins of Tyler's betrayal was better than anything I could have imagined during those dark days of discovery and planning. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us become the catalyst for the best things we create for ourselves. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.